Joe. So, again, my name is Keith Demansky. I'm with the Economic Development Corporation of New York City. I'm joined by our Ferry team and as well as our consultants. And I'm here to present to you on our Ferry plan. So if everyone from our team could just stand up. After the presentation, we're going to be separated into the corners to do Q&A on specific questions. So look for us when we're standing around, and we're looking forward to matching our work with your local expertise. So just, again, a brief overview by my colleagues who will be following up and continuing the presentation. And again, I would ask if you wouldn't mind just holding your questions to the end where we can answer them all at once. So why a ferry in Astoria? As you all know, and as Ms. Kogar and Mr. Kuzmani will tell you, just like the rest of New York City, the maritime and waterfront is an integral part of our community. It was originally, Astoria was founded in the late 1600s by William Hallett and his family, who came to the country, or came to New York from escaping persecution to create a better life for their family, which I think is something many of our families have done as well. And in the 1780s, a ferry was established, and that was in existence for about 150 years until 1936, when the ferry depot was closed after the construction of the Triborough Bridge. Pardon my disco moves, but you'll see here with the peninsula, it was filled in 1951 when the NYCHA campus was built, and this was the original location of the ferry stop. And then in 2010, the city published a citywide ferry study, which established ferry service on the East River. And in 2013, an update was made, which implied that Astoria is an ideal location for ferry service. In 2014, after HBV's sort of Cove project was approved by the City Council, a feasibility study was included, which is why we're here. And in 2015, the mayor announced the adoption of this ferry plan, which includes the Astoria stop. And so I'm turning it over to James, my colleague.
Sure, thank you. Good evening, everyone, thanks. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about a couple of different pieces from where this study started, where we are right now, and where we're going to. So this study really is focused on identifying where we would be locating a ferry landing and looking through the conceptual design process to actually understand what this thing might start to look like and understand all the different contextual information, like where people are living, going to, where there are transportation issues, and everything that we can do to really understand, including a fair amount of outreach with the community through some community roundtables and opportunities like this to work with folks in the neighborhood. I do want to say also that this is also working towards an implementation plan. So it's not, as you've already heard, we're looking towards 2017, which for us is, coming at us very quickly. We know because we're working as diligently as possible to bring it here. But we do that with a close partnership with all of our city agencies. So I know a handful of folks are also here tonight from the Department of City Planning, Department of Transportation, New York City, the Housing Authority, and Parks and Recreation. So this really is the city working across departments and cross agencies to work towards bringing a project to fruition right here in Astoria. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the citywide plan first. So this is where we're going throughout the city, and then we'll drill down a little bit more into the local context in Astoria. So the citywide ferry plan, just to get an understanding of what we have today, we have the existing Staten Island ferry, of course taking folks from Lower Manhattan to the North Shore of Staten Island, a free service on big orange boats. We also have the East River Ferry. That's what Keith mentioned earlier. And EDC is working with the city. We manage a contract where private operators are providing the East River Ferry service. And that goes from East 34th Street in Manhattan, it comes to the Queens and Brooklyn waterfront, back to Wall Street. So that sort of reverse sea is where we've been learning a lot about our sort of operations, why we are better understanding how ferries are going to be working best in the city and looking at the different neighborhoods and the context that it serves, how people are interacting with it. We'll also talk about sort of our plans network here, which was announced by the mayor in February of this year. So as you can see here, we have the existing East River Ferry in the middle, which is in blue. and then 5 new routes. So we have new routes that are going to, of course, Astoria, which is in the first round, so in the 2017 rollout. And the Astoria route goes from Astoria to Roosevelt Island, Long Island City, East 34th Street, and Lower Manhattan. That's on the direct route. But as you'll notice, there's actually great opportunities along that route and many others to connect to the rest of the city. So we have a route going to the Upper East Side and the Bronx. We have a route going to South Brooklyn. One takes you all the way to the Rockaways, and also to the Lower East Side. So there's a lot of opportunities in the future, so not only on the one route that you have, but actually to connect to the rest of the city and its waterfront communities. And like I said, or has been said, big important news is that this is coming at the same cost as a bus or a subway at $275, and that Astoria is lucky because it's on the first round of 2017 rollout. So really excited to be able to do that. So talking about the transportation context a little bit, sort of understanding how we're planning around ferries and sort of where we think people are coming from. Ferries are really best serving people in waterfront communities who are in a walking market. And what do we mean? We mean the people who sort of live within walking distance to a ferry landing are the people who are most likely to use it. We don't sort of say that people are going to walk past a subway in order to get to a ferry landing, or people aren't going to drive into a neighborhood where, as we've heard, there are parking limitations. And we don't expect that people are going to want to sort of go through that in order to get to the ferry when there are other options available to them, like the subway, for example. So in this neighborhood where we're almost a mile away from the nearest subway stop, this does not a lot to make the subway trip easier, but it does a lot for communities who are closer to the ferry landing. And so we're really excited that for those locations we're going to really shorten commutes and save people time. On average, it'll save about 15 minutes from where the ferry landing is proposed to get down to Wall Street. And if you're doing that twice a day, 5 days a week, you're saving 2.5 hours every week out of commute time. So that time really starts to add up. So we've heard from the community in our roundtable and through our walk-around with Pastor Jackson and Ms. Koger, really understanding that parking is a real concern. We understand that has been a concern, and in fact the councilman has also brought this up with DOT, and that's always been something good that we're working across agencies to look at that. But as I had started to mention earlier, we know that surveying our East River Ferry riders that more than 90% of people are coming to us either walking, biking, or taking transit, so taking a local bus, for example. Very few people are driving to these landings because it usually doesn't make sense. Ferries are great, again, waterfront communities. It's not something you necessarily are driving to get to work every day. And I do want to reiterate the fact that if parking is already a challenge, we sort of don't expect someone to drive around looking for parking for 15 minutes to miss their boat and not be able to get into the office. When we look at the development in the long run, the new residential development that's coming online in the community, we sort of scale up and understand what the ridership is going to be on the ferry. And we're projecting about 600 people a day when you get out to 2025 who are going to be using the ferry in Astoria. So when you do the math on that and look at what the actual car pickups and drop-offs and the parking ratios are, we anticipate that fewer than 10 parked cars will be here as a result of the ferry, because most people are going to be walking and biking in other modes. So we've started to mention our discussion about locating the landing in Hallett's Cove, which is on the southern side of the peninsula. We did look broader. We did start by saying where along the peninsula would we want to put this landing? And there's a lot of considerations. There's transportation considerations on the land. There's looking at where residential development is and where it's coming. We look a lot at the sort of maritime features and understanding navigationally where it's safe to bring a ferry in, because we have to balance all of these things when we're looking at it. And as we start to make our way around the peninsula, if we start on the north side, we found that that's really challenging because you have to go through an area that's called Hellgate. It's been called Hellgate for centuries, and it's known that way because it's some of the choppiest water in New York Harbor. And as we've spoken to DOT, to ferry captains, to people in the harbor, everyone who drives a boat and does it regularly and takes people with them is saying that if you don't have to go through Hellgate on a regular basis, you probably shouldn't. So we are very sensitive to that and understand that, that poses some real challenges for us. As we move our way around to the western part of the peninsula, some of the things we're sensitive to, we know that there are existing uses, we know people are fishing there, we know that there are reasons why you might want to think about it, but again, the navigation concerns, so in the water, we're actually near a federal navigation channel where there's barges coming by on a regular basis, and we want to make sure that safety is paramount in everything that we're doing. So we've sort of moved past the western shore and found that there's actually a very nice cove, the Hallett's Cove area, which is very protected. It's just off of this map, but Roosevelt Island is just southwest of there and actually protects a nice calm area of water, which is in active use, by a lot of different people, whether they're watching from the water or going in kayaks, things like that, and things that we're very sensitive to as we continue through the design. So talking a little bit about how people get there, we'll talk about land side, and then I'll have Alan, who's from our consulting team, talk a little bit more about the water side and the in-water development of the project. But when we're looking on the land side, we start with the walking paths because we do care about how people are getting places and where they're coming from. So we start, and we were looking again, we said we want to make sure that people from the local community who have beautiful esplanades that come down and drop you into the southern part of the peninsula, that they're able to use those and understand where people would be walking, that there's access to the western and the northern areas where there's anticipated new development so that people who are new to the community can also be able to access this. And then also to the east, we anticipate that there would be a lot of walking that comes from the east and actually connects close to where 8th Street and Main Avenue come together and connect to the Esplanade over there. That'll be a crucial intersection at Vernon Boulevard. So the black dotted line is the sort of walking area, what we assume people would be able to generally walk to the ferry. You could obviously go further, but this is sort of our planning assumptions to help us get an understanding. We've also looked at bikes in transit. So bikes, what we've learned about our experience on the East River Ferry, and again, everything changes a little bit, but one of the nice things is that bicycles and ferries are very, very good friends. People who ride bikes and get to a ferry are really usually going to bring it on board to solve what we call the last mile problem. So a ferry gets you 90% of the way there, and then you get off and now you have to walk, say, 4, 5, 6 blocks. A bicycle is perfect for those kinds of distances. So we find that a lot of people are bringing their bicycles on, and our surveys actually show that there's not a lot of people who sort of bike to a ferry landing, stop, park their bike there all day. The people who are using it on bicycles actually get there, bring it on board, and carry on. So we thought it was important to look at all the bike routes and looking at the two-way bike lane that goes along Vernon Boulevard, looking at the other bike infrastructure and lanes that are transecting throughout the peninsula, and understanding that people are able to cycle safely around the area. We also looked at transit. We did talk about buses earlier and subways, and that people aren't probably going to go past it. And while we do think that's true, it's also good to know sort of where those natural connections are. People are going to take public transit and they're going to continue their journey. So there's a lot of good options a couple blocks in that you can start from and continue your journeys east. We highlighted this intersection because this is one where we really heard that from the community that there was concern about how this intersection is going to play out, just because there's going to be a lot more sort of pedestrian traffic. People are going to be walking in this area. And so if you look at the red box in the top left is where we're considering the ferry landing. The red line actually shows where we assume some of the natural walking paths are. Go north or south along Vernon Boulevard. There's not a crosswalk where that angled red arrow is, but we do think that that's sort of a natural walking path. And this brings up a couple of different sort of pieces to be aware of. We know that there's sort of a fast-moving traffic movement that comes in from the north, from 8th Street and Main Avenue. We look at where the signalized intersections are. We look at where the two-way bike lane is and the bus stop. And so there's just a lot of activity here. We've already mentioned this to DOT. We've already started working to say that these are areas that we want to make sure that we highlight. And so as the ferries come online, we will work with DOT to make sure that we understand how people are using these areas, and if there are issues that need to be addressed, we'll be able to work with them. It's on everybody's radar at this junction. So I'm going to pause here and turn it over to Alan, who's going to talk a little bit more about what the ferry landing itself will look like and some of the design features that went into it.